Okay, folks, we're going to go ahead and do a shocking thing, which is start roughly on time. This is the third, really, technically, of our speaker series this year for the 2014-15 State of the Rockies project. It's my distinct pleasure both to have Courtney White here on hand and also to say there's a certain logic to the sequence this year because we've gone from water to climate to cows, and you might be thinking, what on earth do those things have in common? And I think we're about to hear why they have so much in common. Courtney White is the longtime director and now the creative director, I think, of the Quivira Coalition out of Santa Fe, New Mexico. You may have heard of his work, where they created, sometime in the late 90s, a radical center. Imagine that today, a radical center, to try to find compromise between environmentalists and ranchers in the American West. And I'm not going to harp on for too long. I am just here to do my ploy and scheme is to sell some copy for Mr. Courtney White. We have books available from the bookstore. The good folks from Nebraska Bookstore over there ready to sell you a glorious copy of Grass Soil Hope. It feels great in the hand. It's got this matte, sort of smooth finish to it. And in case, I'm not going to go on. I'm Eric Paramon, the director of the State of the Rockies, and now, as our custom, I'm going to turn it over to one of our student researchers, Max Hittensdorf, whose topic is most closely related, as you'll see, to the topic that Courtney will address this evening. So without further ado, Max, come on up.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. My name is Max Hittensdorf. I'm a senior at CC and participated, as Eric said, in the State of the Rockies research this summer. And one of the topics you'll hear tonight is ranching and conservation. While the two seem sort of at odds with each other, one is often associated with meat production, extraction, and an old way of managing land, and the other connotes a new progressive way of thinking about natural landscapes. I quickly found out during my studies that ranching and conservation can, in fact, greatly benefit from each other. Now, although I felt like I'd come across a great discovery of some sort, this is sort of old news for many in the conservation community in the American West. The discussion today centers more on the question of how to sustain ranching that conserves land into the future. Answering this question is not easy. I attempted it in my research. I read a lot of papers. I went out to see the West in person with the State of the Rockies crew. I interviewed people living on and dealing with land in the West, and ultimately, I realized I was just skimming the surface. One promising solution, though, is building of what is called social capital, a term that essentially means the social ties among individuals and organizations that can help achieve an end. And I'm very thankful to have people like Courtney White here tonight who can shed light on this issue among many others. Courtney is sort of a renaissance man of conservation work. He has over the years worked as an archaeologist, rancher, Sierra Club activist, nonprofit founder, scholar, teacher, photographer, and writer. One of his most notable accomplishments, as Eric was already mentioning, is the creation of the Quivira Coalition, a nonprofit dedicated to building bridges between ranchers, conservationists, public land managers, scientists, and others around the practices that improve land health. This group represents a crucial opportunity to better understand the way social connections, the social capital that I mentioned, contribute to land conservation. Furthermore, Courtney has written numerous articles and essays that have appeared in publications, in publications such as Farming, Acres Magazine, Rangelands, the Natural Resources Journal, and Solutions. He's also written two books that are now published. One is called Revolution on the Range, The Rise of the New Ranch in the American West, and the other, which came out recently and you should buy, is called Grass Soil Hope, A Journey Through Carbon Country. Additionally, a collection of essays titled Age of Consequences will be published in early 2015. Today, his conservation work focuses on building economic and ecological resilience on working landscapes, with a special emphasis on carbon ranching and the new agrarian movement. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you someone whose writing has been an influence in my own work and whose activism has inspired many in the field, literally and figuratively. Please welcome Courtney White.
Hello, everybody. Is this working? I feel like I'm a witness for the prosecution up here. So if I squint, I apologize. I really appreciate the invitation to be here. Thanks to Eric and to the State of the Rockies project. I've followed the State of the Rockies a number of years. We've had at least one group come down to our offices in Santa Fe and do some research on ranching and conservation. So it's a treat for me to be here talking to you tonight. I'm going to take you on a journey. As he said, my background is I'm a city boy from Phoenix. I grew up not thinking about a lot of these issues. I became a Sierra Club activist, and then I became a dues-paying member of the New Mexico Cattle Growers Association. Still, I think both groups weren't sure what to make of that. But it's been a very interesting journey for me. I'm going to take you through it and talk about some conservation issues in the West today. And then I'd like to get at, where do I point this? Here, this. Is it working? Am I pushing the right button? There it is. We're going to talk about solutions today. There are a lot of problems in the world. We're aware of most of them. I've been in this field for 20 years now. I think that we have a lot of good ideas and solutions to problems, but how do we get beyond them to something bigger? And that's going to be the end of the talk. Definitely some food for thought about how to kind of scale up these issues. How do we get to a scale that can make a difference in the world. But to do that, I'm going to start at the beginning of my journey and kind of take you through a bunch of stuff. Work of the Quivira Coalition, my work, writing, a lot of other folks, and kind of throw some things at you to think about, and hopefully at the end, it'll stimulate some questions. And we can all kind of think together, how do we get to kind of a scaled up version of the world that we want. So to do that, I'm going to take you largely through the story of the Quivira Coalition. These are various projects. That's Wendell Berry there, spoke at our conference. We've done a lot of creek work, a lot of ranch work, which I'll explain to you as quickly and hopefully as thoroughly as I can in the time that we have. Quivira is an old Spanish colonial word. The Spanish, when they came up to New Mexico, were looking for Quivira. It always was kind of the shining city or place over the hill, and the maps, they wrote it in for unknown territory in the old maps. And when we got started in 1997, we were trying to bring ranchers and environmentalists together, and we figured that was unexplored territory at the time, so we picked Quivira as kind of a sort of a non-denominational way of explaining what we're trying to do. We went from the early days of small groups trying to bring ranchers, conservationists, scientists, land managers together and kind of look at the ground to a landscape now, and I'll explain this a little bit later. We look at a holistic vision of how we make these landscapes work for us. So it has all these different parts. Are regenerative, sustainable, but we have grown over the years, along with other organizations and other ranchers and farms, to kind of look at a more holistic image of how we solve some of these problems that we have today. So to do that, whoops, I'll do a little bit of a history here. Quivira in 1997, I came up through the Sierra Club, not thinking about cattle ranching, more concerned about some other issues in the mid-90s, mining, things like that. But I met a rancher, Jim Winder, who was actually part of the Sierra Club at the time in New Mexico. And Jim had joined the Sierra Club. This was the period of time, for those of you who can remember back that far, when ranchers and environmentalists were killing each other. In court, in the court of public opinion. It was just every day, you literally opened the newspaper and there was some fight between ranchers and environmentalists. We decided to try to wade into that to create some peace, what we called the Radical Center, try to find some common ground, believing that ranchers and environmentalists had more in common than in difference once you kind of stripped away the politics. In fact, that's been our experience. And so when I met Jim, the rancher who was doing things differently, was trying to reach out to the environmental community, wanted wildlife. He was the only rancher in the state of New Mexico that publicly supported the reintroduction of the Mexican wolf. And when I heard that, I said, I got to meet this guy. I got to understand what he's doing. When we got started, and this is very much part of what Quivira does, was get back to the grassroots, kind of get beyond no lawsuits, no legislation. We literally wanted to start over at the grass and the roots. So we took groups of folks out to well-managed landscapes, some well-managed ranches, and literally dug little holes in the ground to kind of understand what's going on in the soil. Over the years, we've done many workshops on plants and drought, and this is a kind of Quivira version of a hayride. We started an annual conference in 2002. Who's been here? I know Dave and Linda have been to our annual conference. It's in Albuquerque. We just had it 2 weeks ago as a way of kind of bringing the radical center together, trying to bring land managers and ranchers and farmers and conservationists to talk about these issues. We advocate a series of land management practices, which I'll get into a little bit. At the time, they were new news. Today, they're not so much. So herding, kind of going back to nature's ideas of herbivory, the way animals move across landscapes. This is a group in the West Elk Wilderness, using electric fencing to kind of protect areas, creating small paddocks for the animals to graze in, rapid rotational grazing. This is what Jim was doing. I didn't know anything about it until I started talking to him, understanding how he was trying to mimic animal movement, wild herbivore movement across these landscapes with simple strands of electric fencing, creating small pastures, taking the fence down and moving the cows on. This is, excuse me, this is Jim. Is there some water actually at all anywhere? And if you can find somebody, great. And Jim has a great sense of humor. He liked to talk about the legless cow. This is what, at the time, if you talk to the environmental community, there's no such thing. It was all overgrazed. Well, no, there was plenty of well-managed landscapes that had cattle in them. And this was a definition that we wrote at the time. And the orange part is what's important. And this was newsworthy then, I think it's still newsworthy today, that the natural processes that sustain wildlife habitat, biological diversity, and functioning watersheds, or what conservationists want, the same processes that make land productive for livestock, which is what ranchers want. This is that common ground. This is where the radical center gets started, trying to find practical solutions to problems in the landscape. The idea is land health. It's not a new idea. Aldo Leopold was talking about it in the 30s. These are his two quick definitions. The capacity of land for self-renewal. This is what nature does. Nature renews itself, and those practices that help improve land health, help that renewal process, should be promoted and conserved, whether they are agricultural or not. And then conservation, it should be our effort to understand and preserve this capacity. These are pretty radical statements in the 30s. They were still pretty radical in the 90s when we got started. Hopefully they're not so radical today. Leopold was an amazing person on a lot of levels. He was the first person to identify the erosion problem connected to overgrazing in landscapes in the 20s. He was driving around looking at this. But I like this map up in the corner. Kind of shows you doing it right, doing it wrong. It's all about the management. It's all about how these landscapes function at a healthy level or not, and what we can do to get them back into shape. And here's an example. This was a map that changed my perspective. This was back in 2000. This was a map done of the Altar Valley, which is south of Tucson. It was commissioned by a group of ranchers, landowners, concerned about sprawl coming down from Tucson. And what they did is they asked the range guy to go out and make a map of rangeland health, what they called rangeland condition. So and the quick of it is the red is unhealthy, the green is healthy. You're looking at water, soil, and plants and how they interact. Is it in good condition, is not in good condition? What's important here, let me try this, is this red area here is not healthy, it's not functional, it's at risk. Here's what it looks like. This is a ranch right in the middle there called the Palo Alto, which was badly overgrazed by cattle. So you would imagine that it would be red, non-functional on those levels. That's right up here. Oops. Right up here. Down here is this big splotch of red. Also is in terrible condition. It's the National Wildlife Refuge. It hasn't been grazed by cattle at that point in 17 years. It still hasn't been grazed by cattle. And the point is, I'm not trying to make pro or con here. We were asking questions about land health. Is it healthy? Is it functional? If it's not, Why not? And what can we do about it? Don't tell me simply because it's grazed is going to be unhealthy. That's just not true. So you start by asking these questions about land function. The science community did all this work, really great stuff, looking at soil, grass, and water and how they interact. So we started with a basic idea of land health. Is it functional? Is it not? And then go from there. So, pop quiz, though you probably can guess the answer. So where were the cattle in this picture? I don't use fence line contrasts a lot. I think they're a little too simple black and white kinds of issues. But I throw this up as an example of, take a guess. Were they on the right or on the left? You can probably guess, right? So they were on the right. They were there for 5 days. They were out, and the rains came. What they did is they stirred that soil up. They put down fertilizer. The rains came and the grass grew. They were not grazing on the left-hand side. So again, I'm not making kind of pros and cons here. I'm just trying to provoke conversation about what is health. Now, don't tell me again, because a certain practice is happening, that it's got to be unhealthy. Here's an example of cattle being an agent of restoration. Same question, this is in Texas. Which side looks healthier to you, right or left? So that's that question, not where the cows were, but what is healthier, right or left? Left? Green looks good. Right looks gray. Well, this is the fence line between a ranch and CRP land. If folks know what CRP is, it's land that's been put into reserve, non-use for 25 years. And in a country like Texas, where it rains a fair amount down there, or at least it used to, without some kind of herbivory, some kind of disturbance, some kind of fire or grazing, that land will go senescent. It'll go dormant, essentially. The biological activity is not nearly as strong and good on the right-hand side here as on the left. And not a question of cattle, but it's a question of, is it healthy or not? And if it's not, what do we do? Okay. So we called this a new ranch, just kind of a name I made up, not terribly original. But these are the kind of the key principles of this. Grazing is a natural process. It's been going on in North America, grasslands, for 66 million years, not by cattle, but by herbivores, bison, antelope, pronghorn, things like that, rabbits. Disturbance is a critical part of ecosystems. When I was first active in the Sierra Club, I learned a lot about fire. Trying to get fire back on these landscapes, it's a natural process. We put a lot of fires out over the decades. Grazing is going through the same process. It can be a positive forest disturbance in these landscapes. Impulsive energy, like big herd of bison moving through, what it'll do to a landscape, pretty disturbing, especially if you're there right after they went through. And then finally, the key to good range management, timing, intensity, and frequency. There's a whole nother lecture here just on that. So we wrote a book, 2001, called the New Ranch Handbook, and this was kind of the science behind this progressive cattle management idea, land health stuff. And I'll come back to this in just a sec. Then, after we got started, we met this man. This is Bill Zedike. He is a retired Forest Service biologist who reinvented himself as a riparian restorationist. And riparian areas are where the creeks creek streams, generally where there's water running through a system. And Bill had come up with a whole new way of repairing damaged landscapes. So let me show you this. This is kind of another pop quiz. What does this look like to you? Does it look like a creek? It's not. Something's happened here. Anybody take a guess as to what happened here? It's an old wagon road that has eroded over time. We have very friable soils in New Mexico. I think you got the same kind of soils here largely. Erosion happens quickly. This is an old, so I walked up this and I saw this. And actually this image really changed my perspective. This is, we're on private land. This is in western New Mexico near Quemado in Ketchum County. That's Forest Service land behind it. I asked the rancher what was going on here. He said, well, those fence posts sat on the ground in 1937. All that erosion has happened in that interim. If you kind of block out the top, you can say, well, yeah, we got erosion. You know, Aldo Leopold was writing about this stuff. But then you look at the fence posts, understand how much erosion there's been. I asked an agent of the NRCS, the Federal Old Soil Service, how much of the rest of New Mexico had this problem. He said most of the state. Most of the state has this kind of erosion problems. As a Sierra Club activist, as an environmentalist, I didn't know that. I mean, I knew there was problems. I didn't understand the scale of the problems, partly because I didn't know what I was looking at. I looked at these landscapes, I didn't understand the language of land health, the language of erosion. So this is a major problem in the Southwest. Bill Zedek understands that. Here's what he's been doing, and this was why we were so excited when we met Bill. He's got these structures that he puts in the creek here to re-meander the system. In New Mexico, when systems degrade, when that wagon road captures the creek, it cuts down and it straightens out. He calls them adobe tubes. They just shoot water off the landscape. What he's trying to do here is re-meander systems. Creeks will want to meander, and they'll do it again over time. He's trying to speed this process up. Here's a good example. The creek used to go right through here. He's turned it with one simple structure. These are just sticks, carefully placed and woven around with some reeds and things. Creates a sandbar behind it here. These are my children way back when. My son is now taller than I am. But it gives you a sense of kind of how this works. Here's another example here. See how this structure right here has turned the creek? Used to bite into this bank right here, now he's turned it. He puts them at very careful places to get that system to turn, to dissipate energy, to drop its sediment load, to build those sandbars, and eventually grass and other riparian vegetation will return. He calls it letting water do the work, letting nature do the job. And here's how this works. Here's a straight adobe tube. By putting these structures in, he's beginning to bend the system here. Nature will do this over time. We're speeding that process up. Bill likes to tell folks, don't just go home and do this in your backyard. It's a little more complicated than that. There's some math and there's other stuff that you have to do here. But the idea is that he's using natural principles, small flood events, to re-meander systems that have degraded and are cutting down. It's the same idea that Jim Winder, the rancher, was talking about how to use animals, herbivores, cattle, to restore degraded rangelands by controlling the timing, intensity, frequency. So they fit together very nicely. In fact, Bill will tell you that you shouldn't do this work unless you have the grazing under control, because they don't want the cows just to come and eat up all that vegetation that you're growing. So let me show you some examples real quick of how this goes, and then we begin to get at that kind of larger picture. This is Comanche Creek. It's up in the Valle-Vidal unit of the Carson National Forest in northern New Mexico. I was approached by some fishing organizations way back in 2001 trying to restore this landscape for native Rio Grande cutthroat trout, which is the state fish in New Mexico and on the way to the endangered species list. And here's why. Whoops. This is an aerial of the area from the 70s. Those are logging roads. So this had every Old West sin you could think on this landscape back when it was private property. Logging roads, 6,000 head herd of cattle overgrazing, a gold mining district. Probably not a surprise why Pennzoil, the corporation that owned this land, donated it to the Forest Service in 1981 for a tax break. They said, well, we've had it with this landscape. So this was a worn out, battered piece of land. The Forest Service, to its credit, changed a lot of the management. They reduced the logging and they put the cattle under herding management, but the fish population continued to decline. And there's not many Rio Grande cutthroats left. This was one of the best watersheds for them. So we got involved in a long-running project that's still ongoing today to restore this watershed to health using Bill Zedek's ideas. I'll show you them real quick. So what Bill has done, these are very simple, low-tech, low-cost, low-energy, meaning implementation efforts that bring a lot of ecological bang for the buck. So these are little structures he's put in here to steer the creek away from the embankment. They're called post veins. Here's an example of a post vein here. You can see the 6 logs here, a little bit of rocks here. This is an overlong meander that's biting into the creek there. That's bad for the fish. It's bad for a lot of things. It's a sign of a stress in the system. By putting this stuff here and creating a pillow of water and turning the water this way, we got this kind of response in only 3 years. What would have taken a diesel machine, cement, whatever the paradigm is to fix these creeks, you get in there and you manhandle them, you do all this stuff to them. Bill's done with 6 sticks, some rocks, and about 3 hours of volunteer labor. This is, and again, he's thinking like a creek. He's thinking, well, what would nature want to do here? Let's push that process along a little bit. He's a big advocate of what are called one rock dams. These are just one rock high. All you're trying to do is slow water down. You kind of dissipate that energy. Bill will tell you if you do anything in a landscape, do not build a dam across even an arroyo. He says creeks don't want to be lakes. They will be creeks again, sooner or later. We, as humans, are impatient. We want to dam things and get them going. That doesn't work. So don't build anything taller than one rock to slow that water down. You can put these, you can do at home. These are simple structures to do. Roads, what roads do to landscapes, highly destructive and largely off people's radar screens. We live in a culture in the West where we are fixated with kind of charismatic species, the wolf, the bear. We get into conflicts over these things. What roads do, dirt roads do to the watersheds is tremendous ecological damage. Culverts, and this is not sexy stuff, but this is what Bill has taught us, is that you got to look at what culverts do. All that sediment here is terrible for the Rio Grande cutthroat trout, right? Fixing culverts, fixing roads. These are huge improvements in these ecological landscapes. Roads cut off watersheds, and if you can dip them and get that water back in, all kinds of things happen. Here's what happened here a couple years later, just through our work. You can see the structures in the creek there. Bill's written a book on this. I won't go into the details, but he works a lot with landowners on dirt roads across landscapes. And in the West, we've got hundreds and millions of miles probably of dirt roads. If they're poorly maintained and poorly designed, they're doing tremendous damage, particularly to wetlands. You put a road across a wetland and watch it die. You can talk about the wolf all day long, but if you want the wetland to come back, you got to fix the roads. Culverts. Here's a good example. Here's a wetland in the Comanche Creek area. This was created by a badly placed culvert in the road. It created a little head cut. These are little dry waterfalls. It migrated up that wet meadow. Anybody think that this is healthy looking land? No. So on a map, it'd be red probably, because it's not functioning well. And when you do this to a wet meadow, what happens to the water table? It's down at the bottom here. That's where the water table is. Not good for anything that's dependent on a wet meadow. Wet meadows are highly important in a dry country like the West. So wildlife can't use it very much. Cattle can't use it. Elk don't like it. So what do you do? And this is the Forest Service. This is the traditional method to fix these eroded areas. What is that? It's a dam. Not one rock high. It's about 6 feet high. What do you think is going to happen to this? Take a guess. Think it's going to last? No. Water's going to go over it, undercut it. If you don't maintain it, it's going to blow out. And over time, all that sediment back there is going to move downstream. And Bill will tell you that this will be worse than if you'd done nothing at all here. All that sediment is going to scour that system out and drop that system even farther. So what do you do? So Bill has a whole methodology about wet meadows and head cuts. Here's a head cut here. Here's Bill. And I won't go into all the details. He put fabric down. This is filter fabric that breathes. Put rocks down, one rock high, and the system heals up over time. This is what a recovering system looks like, largely. We built these little elk enclosures around willows, cottonwoods to keep the elk out. We can manage the cattle. This is what's nice about livestock, domesticated animals. If you have them under control, you can tell them where to go. Elk don't read instructions very well. And if you build, so that up in this watershed was a mile square elk enclosure. What do you think was inside of it? Lots of elk poop, right? They're not intimidated by fences, especially if they're not maintained. But they will not jump into these here. So we built these small, this is Bill's idea, build these small enclosures around things, up they go, and then they spread out. And then here's a structure in the creek. And this system is recovering. This system's on the way to being healthy again. From a degraded landscape, bad for the fish, bad for wildlife, to a healthy system using very simple structures, but thinking like a creek, not thinking like a human being on a yellow diesel tractor, but thinking about how the system here would have handled this normally and pushing that system along. Again, much like what the ranchers that we work with are doing, thinking about herbivory, the way animals move across landscapes. So these things come together very nicely. It's also fun. We have these are volunteers that come out every year. We've had Boy Scouts, we've had Youth Corps, we've had lots of folks go through this project. People like to get in the creek and get muddy. And also you feel like you're giving something back to nature. We have a culture that tends to take. This is a giving. And so this is kind of a redemptive activity in a sense. You get in the creek, you feel like you're giving something back to the fish. Let me give you another quick example from private land. That's public land, Forest Service land. This is a private farm near Raton. The landowner, the young woman there, came to us in something like desperation. They were losing the farm. Her father actually had made some bad decisions to wrestle with this river. This is the Dry Cimarron River. This is what he had done. He knew he had an erosion problem in that system, a lot of the same issues. The creek was straightened out, down it went. That's not a tire dump. He's actually trying to stop erosion there and trying to stop losing his farm fields and going out of business. He gave up. He said, okay, I don't know what to do. This is not working. He actually built a dam. He actually went out and dammed the river, and every bureaucrat involved in water management came out of the woodwork and said, you can't be building dams across rivers. So he retired. His daughter came to us and said, let's try something else. We got Bill involved. To make a long story short, we reimagined the whole river through their property. He had taken out meanders. We put the meanders back in. We had to use a yellow machine here to do this, but we re-meandered the system, slowed it down, did a lot of uplands work, those one rock dam kind of structures here, slow water down coming into that system. And this is the response only 4 years later. Here is one of those veins I showed you earlier. The water's flowing this way. We didn't do anything here except put those sticks in the creek. All that vegetation was there, it grew back. You give it a break, and here's the farm field that they were worried about losing here. The creek is moved over here, it's away from the side. You can see all the vegetation growing. This is back when it used to rain more. You have tremendous response when there's water involved, and you give nature a break. You give it a chance to recover. This farm has been saved by this work. Everybody has been out there now looking at it, measuring it, and all kinds of stuff. So Bill's ideas work. They've now been vetted widely across the Southwest. When he started, the Army Corps of Engineers, which permits this work, said, no, can't be doing this. This doesn't work. Now they say yes. So we've actually made a lot of progress here. So Bill wrote this book. If anybody's interested in this kind of activity, this book is available now through Chelsea Green Press. And I'm going to come back to this book in just a second. So this is a manual on how to do riparian restoration, letting water do the work. Like letting cows do the work for you. So, third example, after we did all this work, we as an organization got involved in a grass bank. This was a project started by Bill DuBois, who's a conservationist in Santa Fe and an author. Bill got this idea to talk the Conservation Fund, which is an environmental group, into buying a 36,000 acre ranch near Santa Fe. It's on the Santa Fe National Forest, to become a permittee and not stock it with cows himself, but to take cows from other grazing associations across northern New Mexico in order to get thinning and burning done. We have a lot of overgrown forests in northern New Mexico. I think Colorado's got some of the same issues. How do you deal with it? You want to thin it, you want to burn it, you want to get back into that natural cycle of fire. He offered the grass bank, the 36,000 acres, as a place to put the cows while this restoration work took place. And for a while, it succeeded very well. He took cows from 9 different grazing associations over about 6 or 7 years onto the grass bank, and the Forest Service did a fair amount of work. He turned it over to us in 2004, which is how we became a grazing organization. We were permittees. So the first thing we did was make a land health map of the 36,000 acres. And so this, again, red is bad, green is good. I won't go into the issues too much. It's mostly to do with tree encroachment into meadows, a persistent problem. What's the toolbox for managing landscapes today? It's not very big, and it hasn't changed much. So if you're going to manage these landscapes, you're going to try to restore them, you have just a few tools. We think cattle are a tool, fire is a tool, mechanical thinning, or some combination of the 2 or 3. To make a long story short, the grass bank struggled. There were at one point 12 grass banks across the West. All of them are out of business except for one, including ours. Unfortunately, kind of a long analysis there, which I won't go into, except to say that two issues. Primarily, working with the Forest Service was difficult. more difficult than we realized when we started. And number two, I had a rancher on the board, my board, who said, Courtney, this has all the costs of a ranch and no income. And we're all like, yeah, okay, great, we'll get grants, you know. Well, that turned out to be an issue. So in 2006, we decided to get in the cattle business ourselves. We hired a rancher, a friend of ours, Jack Hagelstein, to help us manage the cattle. That's our brand. This was a way of trying to earn some money to pay for conservation activities, so it was cattle ranching for conservation. We ended up getting into the grass-fed beef business as a consequence, so we direct marketed our cows, grass-fed animals. Everybody understand what grass-fed is? The animal is on grass its entire life, never goes to a feedlot. So it's much better for you. There's all kinds of good things in grass-fed food. So anyway, we sold our animals direct marketed in Santa Fe under the Raw Mesa pasture-raised beef program. As a consequence, I learned a lot about food. I hadn't really thought about food until this point. We're doing creek restoration, worrying about cattle management, collaboration, working out things with ranchers. Now we're into food production, understanding how this all kind of knits together around local, sustainable, grass-fed food production. I actually got to go to the Slow Food Gathering in Italy, Terra Madre, 2008, as a grass-fed beef producer. For a boy from Phoenix, Arizona, this was pretty trippy, I have to be honest with you. Still trippy to me today. But at that gathering of food activists and producers, I realized that food was the glue that kind of held us all together. So we learned a lot about beef production, grass-fed food as a consequence. So now I'm going to set the stage for where we're going with this. This is a picture of Hurricane Katrina. So in 2007, 2006, I became concerned about some global issues, larger issues. We actually put the word resilience into our mission statement, trying to think about resilience is how to bounce back from a shock like a hurricane. Are you resilient? Can you bounce back to health? And how do we create resilience economically and ecologically in these systems for kind of the global challenges that are now pressing down upon us? So we put resilience. I did a whole conference in 2008 on this idea. And now we've got climate issues bearing down on us. I think this raises the resilience quotient issues tremendously. So in 2009, I sat down and wrote a grant to a foundation. And I asked myself the question, what if you took the cattle management practices of the new ranch and added it to Bill Zedike's work, restoring creeks, improving riparian vegetation, and added it to local food production, grass-fed food production? Would you get something like carbon dioxide reduction, meaning atmospheric carbon dioxide? I don't know. I was asking that question. All these things, I guessed, had a role to play in the climate question. I wasn't sure. I got the grant, and so we actually pursued this. But what really changed my attitude was this publication, which came across my desk in that summer, 2009, from the World Watch Institute, Mitigating Climate Change Through Food and Land Use. Why this was news to me, this is what we'd been doing, food and land use, right? So we've been fixing creeks, arguing about cattle movement and working with ranchers, and then finally thinking about grass-fed food production. And a lot of progress, a lot of new ideas, a lot of beta testing going on, kind of figuring all that stuff out. I never thought about the climate connection. How do these things influence carbon dioxide, particularly in the atmosphere? So in this publication, they talked about this. Oh, we can't see all of it. The orange part is what's important. Only land-based terrestrial carbon sequestration, which means trapping or sequestering of carbon, in the soil, offers the possibility today of large-scale removal of greenhouse gases from the atmosphere through plant photosynthesis. I thought, wow. This is really interesting. Is this true? I don't know. But I knew that the carbon cycle is what we'd all been working with. So carbon cycles, it's a global cycle out of the atmosphere into plants through photosynthesis. You remember your grade school biology, plants take in CO2, right? Break the C off, and the O2 goes back out, and the C goes into the plant. Some of it goes into the soils. So that's how carbon dioxide makes it into the soils. And then some of it goes back out, and of course you've got factory emissions on the other side here. So in this publication, they identified 5 strategies for sequestering carbon in soils. Here they are. Enriching soil carbon. If you're a gardener, you know what that means. That's making that soil dark and rich. That's carbon through plants. Farming with perennials, meaning perennial systems, grasses in particular. Climate-friendly livestock production, which is exactly what we'd been talking about with rotational grazing. Protecting natural areas, protecting open space, which means keeping ranches in business. And restoring degraded watersheds. This is what they said were the 5 ways to sequester carbon in soils. I went, holy moly, this is the work of the Gavir Coalition. I never made this connection. These are the things we're doing anyway. That led to this. And so this was our conference in 2010, which I called a carbon ranch. I tried to think of every regenerative, sustainable, renewable, cool activity I could think of out there. Farming, ranching, CSAs, wildlife corridors, biologists, creek restoration, artists, hikers, birders, everybody. Everybody's part of that carbon cycle. Carbon is an essential part of our lives. Everybody's on this map somewhere, and everybody has a role to play in this carbon landscape. If you're a rancher, try to sequester more carbon in soils. If you're a farmer, try to figure out how to produce food in a carbon-friendly environment, and everyone else has a role to play here. So we did a whole conference on this. It led to the book that is over there that they were waving around, and they're not my agents, but I came out of that conference really kind of excited and fired up about the possibilities of linking all these things together and trying to influence the kind of the climate crisis, the carbon crisis in the atmosphere. And when I started doing some work, I found all these great stories, all these cool projects and people doing stuff. So this is John Wick, the Marin Carbon Project, which is in Marin County, really one of the pioneering projects to look at carbon sequestration in soils, engaging UC Berkeley science departments to figure out how to measure all this stuff. And John's telling a group of Chinese scientists that we have to think about the air and carbon dioxide. What's neat about carbon dioxide, it's free. And if you're a carbon dioxide farmer, which is what a lot of these folks consider themselves to be, it's a free resource, right? It's up there, pull it down, put it in the ground, grow more grass. So this is a chapter in the book. Tom Sidwell is one of the best ranchers I know in New Mexico. He's in New Mexico, doing really fabulous work. He does not think of himself as a carbon farmer. He's doing grass-fed beef, he's restoring rangelands, he's doing all that cattle management, but I can guarantee you he's sequestering more carbon in his soils than he was when he took over this ranch in 2003. And we've talked about it. He understands, he's spoken at our conference, he understands that he's benefiting that climate equation by what he does. You just don't really want to talk about climate change with Tom. You just, hey, no, it's just nothing he's going to talk about. But you can reach those goals through other means. What he's doing is absolutely beneficial. Doran Cox is in the book. He's that farmer in New Hampshire. He calls himself a carbon farmer. Everything he's doing, no-till. How many folks know that plowing, using the plow, is one of the worst things we could do for the environment? Plowing. I didn't know this. There's a hieroglyph on an Egyptian wall, temple, 5,000 years old. It shows a plow. Plowing turns soil over. It kills all the microbes in the soil. It aerates them, exposes them to sun and heat and wind, and all those microbes die. Mycorrhizal fungi in particular are the good guys. They're the ones that transfer carbon between plants and the soil. And when you plow, you kill them all. And then you need fertilizer, inorganic fertilizers, right? Off we go. So Dorn has pioneered a no-till process in New Hampshire. He's doing actually PhD research on spreading carbon wood ash on farm plots. He's trying to revive New Hampshire's farming economy, including grain production, sustainable wheat production. He created a biodiesel out of an old Coca-Cola truck. Biodiesel, he's growing canola on his farm. He's powering almost the entire farm off of biodiesel. He wants to be off the grid. He wants to do the whole system as a closed loop. Really an interesting guy, and more importantly almost, that all of this is on open source networking, the internet. He shares everything. Nothing's proprietary. He works with these group of farmers, sharing all these resources. It's called Farm Hack. You should look it up sometime, farmhack.net. So it's innovation shared. Colin Seiss went to Australia. There's a lot of carbon innovation going on down there. Colin, I won't go into this too much, has a very interesting process where he actually drills, no-till drills an annual crop into perennial pasture. So he's got pasture for his sheep. He's growing oats in it. He drills it right into it. We have an agriculture that keeps annuals and perennials separate, right? Or you keep the animals over here and the farming over here. We don't mix them. He mixes them. Nature likes it that way. And guess what's happened to the carbon content of his soils? It's gone through the roof. And when you increase carbon content of soils, you increase its ability to hold water, because it's got all those pores, micropores and things. The water holding capacity of these soils goes up 4-fold when you build carbon in the soils. Think about drought, and think about how much water we need in these landscapes, how much reservoirs and pumps and things we're doing when you can increase the water holding capacity of soils just by better land management. And he's growing 2 crops here, a note crop, and he's got sheep on this. And he told me if he wanted to, he could harvest the wild grasses that are on his farm and create a 3rd crop, which is what the native aboriginals use for food. So you actually could get 3 enterprises, 3 forms of feeding folks off of one landscape sustainably while building carbon. That has important consequences for feeding the world. You're going to have 2 billion more people by 2050 at least, maybe 3 billion they're saying now. So Colin has it's called pasture cropping. He is a pioneer in it. Australia, I have to be honest with you, Australia's way ahead of us in a lot of ways and a lot of stuff. There's now pasture cropping in a lot of places in Australia. They're much more willing to try ideas, to be honest with you. Don't have a lot of pasture cropping in America yet. But this is in the book. I know I'm trying to sell books, but I'm also trying to tell you that this is an exciting period of time. There's all this kind of innovative stuff going on all around the world related to thinking about carbon in the soils. And in the process of writing the book, I found more stories. And I began to write them up as short profiles, about sheep and cattle together, pasture cropping. There's a big bat movement, water for bats in the Southwest, working with ranchers. So these are just short profiles, trying to reach a different audience, maybe the folks who don't want to read books, journalists, policymakers, things like that. Beavers are nature's carbon engineers. And what they can do to build soils behind those dams, holy moly. I believe, and I support the idea that I've read by some ecologists, that wiping out the beaver population was the worst thing we ever did in North America. It unraveled a lot of riparian areas, unraveled a lot of the West back in the 1820s and 1830s when we wiped out those beavers. So they're coming back, but the populations are down. Nature is not all about agriculture. Nature has a big role to play here. Putting more beavers back in these landscapes would do a lot. This is a very interesting system from France. French scientists were putting solar panels above farm fields. It's called agrivoltism. They're trying to figure out how to, in Europe, they don't have a lot of space, trying to get renewable energy and food production from the same hectare. And they've figured it out and they can do it. It's really, really an interesting way of looking at these landscapes. So in the process of writing those, I kept going. This is actually going to be a book that's coming out next fall from Chelsea Green called 2% Solutions. There's all this innovation, all these cool things going on around the country, around the world, biochar, animal power, the role of cooperatives, food cooperatives, labor cooperatives, bicycle cooperatives, the whole kind of cooperative idea is really important. Keyline, this is a way of working some landscapes. Fiber sheds in California, they're working on making your own clothing from particular watersheds, fiber sheds. Never stop farming. This is a farm in California where they literally never stop farming. It's year-round farming. It's got a technique, it works, where he puts crops in as soon as he takes them out. Very profitable. Putting it all together. So this is a book that come out. But in the process of thinking about this, and this is where I want to go with this. In the 20 years I've been at this, I'm amazed by how much innovation there's been. So if you go back 20 years, you don't have a lot of the things I just showed you, okay? You had some. Bill was just getting started, some of the ranching ideas. In the last 20 years, there's been an explosion of innovation. So you have all those things I just profiled, all taking place really within the last 10 or 15 years. Exciting stuff, important stuff. We now know the links between carbon and food and water. But, and this is an important but, we're all still just pushpins on a map. If you zoom out from a particular project, a good project, like the Marine Carbon Project. But zoom out, we're still just push pins on a map. These are good ideas, but how do you then make it bigger? There are more push pins today than there were 20 years ago, and this is exciting. I've got a book full of push pins, but we don't have this. We don't have a larger landscape. We've not scaled up this innovation yet. And what I get excited and also concerned about, what's exciting is the toolbox, the practices, the ideas, the beta tested are there. That toolbox has been well developed. 20, 30 years of hard work by ranchers, restorationists, food activists. We know how to do organic fruits, or grass-fed food. We know how to fix creeks. We know how to put carbon in soils. We know how to measure them. We know all that stuff, but we don't have anything yet like a scale that matters. We don't have a nationwide bunch of push pins. And this is the challenge we face now. We don't need, more solutions, frankly. We have a lot of them. We have a lot of the stuff figured out. But what we need is to link them together in a way and make an economy out of them. And we're not there and not there close yet. But this is the challenge I think we face now, particularly with the crises that are kind of bearing down upon us. The food crisis in particular, there are going to be 9 billion people 2050. They actually have revised this up now. There's going to be 10 billion people in 2050, they think. How do you feed all these people? How do you do it sustainably? How do you do it in a way it doesn't deplete what we've already done to the earth? I think the answer is something we've called kind of a new agrarianism. It's a resurgent agrarianism led largely by youth, thinking about all these issues and putting that toolbox to work. So we as an organization are now actually putting a lot of energy here. There's a lot of interest among young people in all of these issues. We run an apprenticeship program on farms, ranches. It's a fairly small program, but there's a tremendous amount of interest. So one apprenticeship position that we offer, we get 100 applicants. Not all of them qualify, but all of them eager to get into these questions. Young people today, folks that we run into, eager to get into food systems at some level in particular, whether it's farming or ranching or the food system in general, co-ops, whatever it is. So we've started an apprenticeship program. It's a year-long mentorship on a farm or ranch. There's a lot of mentors out there, including some that are not with us anymore, like Aldo. And what we're trying to do now is spend a lot of time trying to connect those dots between folks who want to teach and folks who want to learn. And to learn these practices and as a way of trying getting at that larger picture. However, and I think about this a lot these days, why can't we work at larger scales? What's in the way? What are we to do about taking all this innovation, all these solutions, how do we get beyond those solutions to a larger scale? So I made a quick list. What's in the way? You know what's in the way. Big ag's in the way. Administrative policies, frankly, are in the way. Congress is in the way. We all know that. Economic incentives are all wrong in this country. Small-scale producers in particular have tremendous disincentives to do what they do. And Joe Salatin, who's a well-known farmer back in Virginia, wrote a book called Everything I Do Is Illegal. And that, meaning that he's been fighting what he calls the food police for years, because he can't, dairying, all that stuff that he does. The incentives are all wrong. We have a lot of paradigms still in the way. Just thinking about these landscapes. I mean, how many folks came here tonight thinking, what's he going to talk about cattle? There's still some of those anti-cattle kinds of things, paradigms floating around out there. There's a lot of tribalism still, and what I mean by that is that folks are kind of in their tribe and don't want to get out of their tribe, and I still see a lot of folks in the environmental community, for example, kind of don't want to hear it. Food, interesting. There's a lot of resistance still in the environmental community to the questions of food production on landscapes. It's about wildlife, wilderness, parks, not about food. So and the other tribe that I struggle a lot with is the research and academic tribe, which doesn't come out to any of this. I don't see researchers, I don't see academics much. On these ranches, in the creeks, 0, 1 or 2. So tribalism is an issue, and then complacency. I think there's a tremendous amount of complacency in this country about the problems that are rising on us rapidly. But there's good news, and I've discussed some of it tonight. There are practical solutions, as I've identified and talked to you about. A lot more today than there were 10 or 15 years ago. In fact, we're sort of swimming in ideas and solutions now, which is good. There's a big desire to learn and do. As I said before, there's a lot of teachers, mentors, been in this for 30, 40 years, really want to pass on that knowledge, what they've learned to do. There's a desire to learn. Doran Cox kind of figuring out how to farm and do it through the internet and things. Doran has a great phrase, by the way. He actually went from the farm into high tech and then went back to the farm. And what he learned was that, as he puts it, farming isn't rocket science. It's more complicated than that. Particularly the way he does it, because he's using balloons and he's taking infrared images and measuring everything and using computer data to manage his farm. It's really an interesting thing he's doing. There's a lot of desire. We have good science. If you go back 20 years, we didn't have as much science as we do today about range management, about creeks, about food production. My heroes are microbiologists. We know a lot about soils now. What's in the soils, nematodes, protozoas, all those things. Didn't know so much glomalin, which I write about in the book. Glomalin's a protein. It's 55% carbon. It's the thing that comes out of mycorrhizal fungi and begins that gluing process of holding soils together. It wasn't discovered until 1996 by a researcher in Maryland, actually. So we have a lot of science. We don't, frankly, I think, need a lot more science at this point. We know that we have needs. The need is big and rising: food, climate, water, and name your need. And there's an urgency to all of this. And I feel it particularly. I have children growing up. I think about them a lot in the context of all these issues. And I feel a very strong sense of urgency here. So we have what's in the way. We have what's pushing us forward. The question now becomes how we begin to kind of link these things together in a way that can create something like an economy, a carbon economy, or a regenerative economy, whatever you want to call it. We're trying to do this at Quivira. I know other folks are thinking about this too. This was our poster from our conference just 3 weeks ago. That's our board member, Sid Goodlow there. Kind of back to the future idea. How do we take these ideas that were in practice herding, grass-fed, organic, kind of went away into the industrial food system, and have come back. And there's actually a lot of this stuff going on and being led by youth. And I want to close with this quote from the Rodale Institute, which is a leader in organic research and farming. This is from a report on carbon and soils. There's actually a fair amount of energy now around carbon and soils going on. But I really like this. So this is kind of our operating instructions as we try to think about how to get beyond solutions, to think about larger pictures. We need to farm like the earth matters. Farming like water and soil and land matter. Farming like clean air matters. Farming like human health, animal health, and ecosystem health matters. It sounds easy, it's not, but this is exactly where we have to go. And the good news is we've made a lot of progress in the last 20 years getting there. Thank you. One shameless pitch, I have a book of essays coming out in January from Counterpoint Press that Wendell wrote a forward for. So that's a lot of this stuff, this latest thinking is in that book. So anyway, I hope we have time for some questions. I threw a lot at you, starting off in that little group, kind of looking at the soils on the ranch, all the way through cows and creeks and food, up to climate and on into how do we make this work economically. So hopefully there are not been too provocative. Hopefully there's some questions that folks have or ideas that folks have about how to do this. That's what I'm looking for. How do we do this? How do we glue this stuff together? So here first and then back behind you.
I was just in California for the 5 years conference.
Mm-hmm.
One was there, a front page article in the San Francisco Chronicle about a 5-year study they just finished. I think Tom was involved in the composting.
Right.
Farm and ranch lands, which ended up sequestering
Right.
carbon and moisture.
Yep.
And because California has a cap and trade legislation,
Right.
the farmers and ranchers are
Right.
getting cash for the work that they're doing for applying compost.
Right. Yeah. So the question is, in California, there's an effort underway to use compost. And this is compost from dairies, dairy manure that's been composted. So it's removing a source of greenhouse gas emissions, which is dairy manure going into landfills. They're composting and putting on rangelands. That's John Wick. I showed you the picture going like this. That's his project. And it's called the Marine Carbon Project. It's actually turned into the Carbon Cycle Institute. They're taking that research and they're trying to scale it up using the cap and trade system that was put in 2006. It's a little bit complicated. That money is not becoming as available for agriculture as they hoped. Jerry Brown's using it to build, well, he used part of it to offset his budget. And then he's using part of it to build a bullet train, which is going to take 30 years to, anyway. So, but that's that project. And the quick of it is, if you actually add compost to landscapes, he gives a shot of carbon, the microbes go, yay, and the whole system gets going. You actually, and they've measured it carefully. And this is a little bit technical, but when microbes eat carbon, they fart CO2, up it goes. So there's a cycle there, so you want to sequester more than goes back out. So that's what they were measuring. Could they increase the carbon sequestration more than they increased the amount of CO2? And the answer was yes. And it's very exciting, actually. And moisture. California has more rain. Well, they used to have more rain. They have a lot of dairies. There's a lot of composting opportunities. Less so in New Mexico, where we have some dairies, but not as many as we need. But it's that kind of thinking. They're actually doing a very interesting project now called a thermopile project, which it's one of my profiles where they're using human waste to compost and use that as a compost now. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of potential composting in the Bay Area, right? And that all is waste. It uses energy and water. If you can compost it and turn it back on the rangelands, wow. There's a high-tech element to it. There's a chip that they put in the soil to measure when the bacteria die. That's the issue with. Anyway, so that's the marine carbon project. Back there. Of the what? Yeah, wetlands. Yeah. Right. So so culverts can do a number of things. If they're placed poorly on either side of it, they can create a head cut. Depends on how it's done. Either it falls off and erodes or creates a jump up that moves upstream. They can redesign the culvert in ways that fix that, or what Bill advocates, maybe not in the high volume roads, but in the smaller roads, is to dip the road there and not use a culvert at all. Okay? And he says, well, where in the Constitution does it say you have a right to go 65 miles an hour down these roads? Right? Let's dip them. He calls them rolling dips, so the water goes across rather than through a system, and it kind of removes all those issues. And when you dam a creek and you put a little tube down there, there's all kinds of other issues that back up water and stuff, and the system is being cut off from flowing through. But if you want to know more, get his book. It's available online. Our organization for free. Maintenance, fixing low standard maintenance dirt roads. He explains it. It gets pretty technical, actually. But it's just a matter of rethinking that paradigm thing of how roads move across landscapes. Right. So I'm going to give you a quick, for example, a rancher came to him and said, I built a road. My daughter got married and built a house across the wet meadow. I knew that I shouldn't run a road across because I was going to ruin it, so I ran the road around the meadow to her house, and the meadow died. And Bill said, well, what you did is you didn't think about all the water coming into the wet meadow, and so they went through and they re-dipped the road everywhere the water came in, the meadow came back to life. Very simple, but you got to think differently. I mean, it's really more a thinking issue than a technology issue, more than anything else. Yes, sir?
Does any of your restoration projects involve prairie dogs?
Prairie dogs. Not us in particular. We have worked with ranchers who don't have heartburn about prairie dogs, and many of the wildlife conflicts with cattle come from poor cattle management. If you manage the cattle differently as a herd, coyotes don't attack a herd of animals, for example. Many ranchers who do this don't worry about prairie dogs, or they can manage away from prairie dog colonies. I mean, it's about management. It's about your goals, and my goal is I want a prairie dog colony on my ranch, or I don't mind it, and I'm going to manage for it, I'm going to manage away from it, that kind of stuff. It's getting away from that varmint mentality as a varmint. Beavers are not varmints. Beavers have huge positive ecological value on these landscapes. So prairie dogs are the same way. There's a prairie dog, they're in trouble. I mean, the populations are declining, and for reasons that are not clear. I mean, food availability, water, climate. I mean, it's kind of all in the background. Other questions? No more questions? One more. Right. All right. 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 Yeah. So Wendell Berry has one of my favorite Wendell Berry quotes is that America's #1 product is waste. And not just food waste, but waste. I mean, we just waste energy. We waste, when we go in these landscapes, and he calls it, we have an economy of the strip mine. We just go in and we strip mine stuff. And he also talks about how nature has no waste. Nature recycles and moves and goes round and around. It's that self-renewing process that Aldo Leopold was talking about. So if you can get at systems that are regenerative, that take waste like dairy manure, compost it and use it, then all kinds of win-wins start to shape up. I mean, this is where it gets exciting. There's a cost, there's paradigms, there's regulations in California, and the idea of turning human waste into compost just blows the minds of some regulators, frankly. You can't be doing that. While they're generating all this electricity to move valuable water through a waste system and out to sea. I mean, it's just kind of nutty. So once you start thinking about how do we reduce our waste in general, whether it's food waste or energy waste, or whatever, then all these systems start to kind of interlock. So I think that's one of the answers to the larger picture, is thinking about scarce resources and how we might renew them, use them more efficiently. I don't like the word efficient. Nature is not very efficient. Nature likes chaos and fires and messes, but it all ends up being part of the great recycling that kind of goes on. We are very efficient, and we strip things down to very narrow pathways, which makes us very unresilient, by the way. Because all you need is we need a corn blight, and suddenly we're going to be like, hungry. So, but your other point is an important one too. After I gave a little bit of this talk at our conference, Rancher came up to me and said, Courtney, that I think the link is health, human health. He sells grass-fed beef to Durango, and he sells it on the health benefits, the grass-fed, cancer fighters, all that kind of stuff. And that's something that resonates with a lot of people, is what makes us healthier. These systems should all make us healthier, and not just land health, but our health, because they're all kind of linked together, organic, grass-fed. So I think there's a health link in there somewhere. But again, that list of what's in the way, it's pretty intimidating. Many of these issues, many of the stuff that the ranchers and farmers struggle with are policy-based, and that requires, Congress to do something. The Farm Bill is terrible, by the way. I mean, there's parts of it are okay, but it's a source of big problems. So, reforming the Farm Bill, getting a carbon tax in place, I don't know, ideas that are out there in this Congress, we start drinking right now, thinking about it. I don't know what the answer to that is. All we can do is continue to innovate at the grassroots level, but at some point, because of the urgency and the concerns and the climate, this all has to go up and out. So we're all struggling to figure out how to do that in really a poisonous political culture that we have right now, where they're killing renewable energy projects around the country rather than expanding them. I don't know what the answer. What I'm encouraged about is that nearly all of these ranchers are Republicans, right? And and there's a lot of political nexus here around that kind of grassroots-based, this work on the food and water issues. That politics kind of goes away because it's not the corporate food system directing policy, it's a grassroots thing. So there's a lot of common ground, a lot of radical centrism that can still happen, I think. Anyway, but it's a complicated, tall order. Yes, sir.
Would you say a few more words about the pros and cons of the conservation reserve program?
Sure. CRP. CRP, I'm not a historian. I think it was instituted back in the Dust Bowl years, or maybe a little bit afterwards. as a way of kind of getting ranchers and farmers to stop doing bad things, creating dust, plowing. So we'll pay you to put it into a reserve program. We'll pay you a yearly rent to not do anything with it, right? Put it in the CRP program for 30 years. Well, 30 years later, you saw what that land looked like. I mean, nature doesn't idle. Nature is busy. Nature is busy all the time. And so when they have found that when that CRP land lies fallow like that, without any kind of stewardship, management, because we live on a planet that, needs management to some level now. It's just the way things are. Things become unhealthy, senescent. Unfortunately, a lot of CRP, I don't know if you know this, a lot of CRP land is coming out of rest and going into ethanol production, corn production. That's what's going on now. We're not putting it into sustainable grazing management, we're putting it into corn production because it's profitable. I mean, so the paradigm there is that rest is preferable to anything else. Well, it turns out it's just not true. Okay, one more question, or any more questions? Kept you longer than you expected, probably. Last one. Yep.
So as a farmer who likes to grow food and soil and recognizes the importance of soil, I'm a little bit nervous about all the excitement and talk around hydroponics and aquaponics.
Right.
Because once people start to, well, we can grow food without soil,
Right.
then the value of soil is kind of lost.
Yeah. So, well, that's a good question. So the question is about aquaponics, hydroponics. I'm actually doing some research on that right now. So hydroponics, and actually hydroponics and aquaculture. So hydroponics is growing tomatoes in water, basically, nutrients and things. Aquaculture is fish farms, generally like off the coast. Both of those are actually kind of lousy systems on a lot of levels. Aquaponics is an interesting alternative. Aquaponics uses fish. So it's fish in tanks. So the fish water then circulates through the garden, fertilizing the garden. So so it's a closed system, and it's kind of a little ecology, so that you don't have inputs, you don't have the big fish tanks, you don't have all the waste from fish products that you have to get rid of. It's a system that goes round and round, uses very little water, uses no soil, uses a medium of some sort. But you can do it in your bathtub, you can do it in your basement, you can do it in your backyard, probably grow marijuana with it. I mean, you can do all kinds of different things to feed people. I understand, I'm with you on the soil side of it, but it's the folks who are doing aquaponics argue that it's a way of producing food organically and sustainably with very little water, very little energy. Fish, protein, and vegetables. So yeah, I'm with you, but we also got to figure out a way to feed folks. We can either have the industrial food system feed us, or we can have fish farms feed us, which are terrible things. Or you can look at an aquaponics system. If you want to go into your basement, your bathroom, grow tomatoes and tilapia, right? It actually is a growing movement. It's neat because it's kind of like gardening. Folks can do it at home. They think about food. Kids, it's like a great kid project. Schools have been doing it. A lot of aquaponics now in schools. Where you can do math and science. Anyway, so I'm with you on hydroponics. I'm with you on aquaculture. Aquaponics is an interesting alternative. And it's just kind of, folks don't know much about it, just look up aquaponics. So the point is that it's all necessary if it's sustainable, ecologically friendly, carbon negative, neutral, put it all together. It's an interesting way of kind of figuring out how to live in this landscape, all of us, and thrive to some degree. Okay. All right, thank you very much, everybody.